Hello, my name is Adam Elliot, and I'm from the class of 89, and I'm an animation filmmaker. I seized all those opportunities at Haileybury that had that sort of creative bent to them. It became pretty clear that my marks in maths and science were pretty tragic, and a career as an artist was really the direction for me to travel. It's good to have goals and it's good to have things to aspire to, but you don't necessarily have to know what you're going to do when you're at high school. And I certainly didn't. I really encourage life experience because, particularly in the arts, if you want to become a filmmaker or a sculptor or a painter, I mean, you need to have some life experience. You need to have had experienced some ups and downs so that you've got some stories to tell. After I left Haileybury in '89, to just make some money on the weekends, I got a stall down at the St Kilda Esplanade Craft Market. I began selling hand-painted T-shirts, and I'd paint these little designs on the front of the T-shirts, hand-painted. I put them in pizza boxes, I cut out the lid, and I sold them for $25 each. This little stall I had, I called myself a stallie, suddenly became quite profitable. I ended up being down there for 5 years, and I sold 5,000 of these little hand-painted T-shirts. And my most popular design was Murray the tap dancing dim sim. And it was a little dim sim with tap shoes on. I don't know why it was popular, but German backpackers loved them. But it did start to get a bit monotonous. And I remember one Sunday morning looking at the guy next to me, and I remember saying to him, "Nev, how long have you been here, Nev?" And he said, 25 years, Adam. And I remember thinking, well, is this it? Is this as good as life gets? Am I going to end up like Neville and be down here for the rest of my life? So I quickly decided, well, 5 years is enough. All my friends are graduating from university. I suppose I should go to university. So that's what I did. I went off to the VCA and became a filmmaker. I realised that filmmaking was a culmination of all the things I loved. I loved writing stories, I loved entertaining audiences, I loved making things with my hands, I loved drawing. So it was this perfect culmination of all these elements. I had a wonderful lecturer, Sarah Watt. She really opened my eyes to how important storytelling is in our culture. She said really what the audience are looking for is a good story well told. I look back and think, well, it's common sense now, but just her saying that, it was a pivotal moment.
When I was young, I invented an invisible friend called Mr. Ravioli. My psychiatrist says I don't need him anymore. So he just sits in the corner and reads.
Blobs of clay are hard to make believable to an audience, but when you infuse them with a really engaging, strong story that people anywhere around the world can understand and identify with, then half your battle's won. I'm always trying to get the audience to empathise with my characters. Harvey Crumpet was based on a Cub Scout leader I had when I was a little kid who had a steel plate in his head. I would never have guessed when that first idea came into my head of making a film based on a man called Harvey Crumpet that 10 years later I'd be standing on stage at the Oscars winning an Academy Award. You know, who has those sorts of thoughts? The Oscar came with many opportunities, and suddenly all the doors in Hollywood swung open and we were offered some amazing projects for me to direct. We quickly realised, well, the reason Harvey Crumpet won the Oscar was because it was an Australian story. We were the underdogs. So we realised the best thing to do was come back to Australia, call ourselves self-appointed storytellers for our culture and keep telling Australian stories. I'm very proud to call myself an independent filmmaker, because being independent means that I get a lot of creative control and a lot of creative freedom, and I get to tell the stories that I want to tell. I mean, I'm lucky that my films don't have to be family friendly. I really can deal with subject matter that is a bit challenging or a bit edgy.
Unfortunately, in America, babies are not found in cola cans. I asked my mother when I was 4, and she said, they came from eggs laid by rabbis. If you aren't Jewish, they're laid by Catholic nuns. If you're an atheist, they're laid by dirty, lonely prostitutes.
My niche is to tell stories that are a bit different. It's good to be different, as my mum said. I've now made 6 films, and I always call my films my children. And of course, you shouldn't play favourites, but if I had to have a favourite, it would probably be Harvey. We found all these tricks and techniques to preserve Harvey, and he's now at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image here in Melbourne. I think as a writer, I still feel as inadequate as I did when I first started writing. It's just as challenging today as it was back then. Really good scripts come from a lot of pain and suffering, and what's that expression? I've suffered for my art, now it's your turn. Now that I've been making films for 2 decades, I know that I have an audience out there. Sitting in the back of a cinema with an audience watching your film for the first time, money can't buy that moment. You know, hearing a joke that you've had written down on paper for years that finally gets a laugh, that's a magical moment. And I think as I get older, I've realised it's less to do with money and it's more to do with just knowing that you can have an impact on a fellow human being. I'm fairly confident when I say that I wouldn't be sitting here talking about Oscars and the success of my films if it wasn't for Hailey Bree. I don't often call myself an Australian. I love to call myself a Melburnian, and I suppose I'm also a Hailey Breeian as well. So they're the 2 things I'm proud to be.